What's the worst you have seen a prank/joke backfire? In college, a couple of girls broke into our dorm room and stole all our clothes. They had stashed them in their apartment, and while they were out, we took them back and hid them. We didn't let on that we knew who took them, and they started freaking out that they lost our clothes. They felt terrible, and we had to go to a thrift store to buy replacements, which they insisted on paying for. We wore thrift store clothes for weeks, letting them search for our clothes everywhere. It was beautiful to watch them go from the joy of pulling such a prank to the anguish and frustration of it getting out of their control. At my high school, the seniors pulled what was probably the dumbest prank that I've ever seen. When I was a freshman, the seniors grabbed everybody's backpacks from outside the cafeteria, which were all just piled outside the cafeteria, because nobody had lockers and the majority of the people there were too rich to care if something went missing from their bag, and they threw all the bags into the lake that is on campus. I don't really know what the purpose of the prank was, other than to beat out your bags, but in the end the ringleader was expelled. The ringleader and the others were forced to compensate every person whose bag they had thrown into the lake, which was quite a bit of money cause there were 5 textbooks and a T83 per bag. Their worst punishment, though, was having to clean the lake by hand. That was the worst punishment, because the lake was absolutely disgusting. Before they tossed 100 backpacks into it, they were hauling tires and a bunch of other random refuse out of that lake for the entirety of their senior year. I didn't experience this, but I was friends with a family member of the victim, so the story may not be completely correct. That warning aside, here is what I understand to be true. In the height of jackass, 4 or 5 boys decided to play a prank on my friend's family member and tape it, then post to YouTube. The prank should have gone as follows. Hang out on bridge. Douse boy with flammable liquid. Push boy over bridge and into water extinguishing flames. Boys all laugh and post to YouTube. Unfortunately, the boy fell onto the cement of the bridge and burned much of his face and upper torso and is heavily scarred. We had a senior basketball game at our school against a rival school that was out in the boondocks. We'd always make fun of them for being chicken farmer hicks, and they'd make fun of us for being uptight city folk. So my buddy gets his hands on 5 chickens. He put paper signs on them with the names and numbers of the guys from the other team. He brought the crates to the upper office in the gym that has access to the rafters. He waited until just before halftime and then released all 5 chickens from the rafters, thinking they'll fly all over and create havoc. What he doesn't know is that chickens don't fly very well. All 5 of them plummeted the 50 feet or so to the gym floor as the seconds ticked away in the first half. All 5 of the chickens either died or were horribly crippled after. They just kinda flopped around on the ground while everyone looked bewildered to WTF was going on. Oh, the horror. He got suspended for a week. This is not my story, but a friend of mine told me that in high school, there were these 2 girls, let's call them Brittany and Sarah, that were inseparable best friends. On Sarah's birthday, Brittany decides it will be hilarious to TP her car. She covers it entirely in toilet paper in the school parking lot. Meanwhile, this guy who liked to sneak away for a smoke was outside smoking in the parking lot when he saw the car covered in TP. For one reason or another, he decides to flick his lit cigarette onto the car. The toilet paper on the car goes up in flames, setting the car on fire. It's around this time that Brittany runs into the lunchroom giggling, "Hey Sarah, you have to see what I did to your car." Neither of them knew it was on fire at that point. A little bit of a backstory is required before I begin. When I was in grade 11, my English teacher, Mr. Crawford, went on personal leave because he had lost his entire family in a car accident. The entire school was devastated. He was an amazing man. He was funny and made learning fun and everyone really liked him. When he was on his personal leave, we had a different substitute teacher every week for 3 weeks until Mr. James came along. Mr. James was by far the strictest teacher I ever had. He sucked the fun out of learning, and if you disrupted the class, he had a zero tolerance policy. He would just kick you out. It didn't matter if you got kicked out on a Monday or a Friday. He wouldn't let you back in class for 7 school days, and it made you think twice about disrupting the class. About 5 months go by, and I arrive early to class, about 10 minutes early. I had a spare the block before. Mr. James isn't in the classroom, and no one else is either. So I decide to unscrew the screws in his chair, to cause it to collapse, when he sits in it. It was a brilliant idea. He wouldn't have known who it was, and it would give the class a chance to laugh at the most hated teacher in the school. I go to sit down, and I wait patiently, and my fellow students begin to show up, but still no sign of Mr. James. I take out my PSP, and get distracted playing it. Little did I know that Mr. Crawford was back today. Mr. Crawford enters the classroom and everyone notices, but I'm too distracted playing my PSP game when my friend beside me says, "Hey McKemmy Steak, Mr. Crawford's back." And before I can say otherwise, he sits down at his desk and his chair collapses underneath him. He ended up fracturing his wrist while falling. I have never felt so guilty in my life. The man had just lost his entire family in a car accident 5 months ago, and his first day back to work he fractured his wrist because of me. Find dead pigeon. Put it in classmate's desk. Classmate opens desk. Pigeon flies away. White elephant party. One of the gifts is a prank lottery card. Lottery card ends up in the hands of a family member whose daughter was very ill and had extremely high medical bills. The winnings would have easily covered them. Many tears were shed, and then the prank was revealed. Many more tears were shed. I have no fucking clue why the person who put the lotto card in the gift exchange allowed it to go on for as long as they did. As soon as that card ended up in the wrong hands, I would have spoken up. Unfortunately/fortunately, this wasn't my prank. A bunch of us were at a house party when we were all younger. Most of us got pretty drunk and decided to sleep over. As we all end up passing out, Buddy decides to take a habanero pepper and rub the juice on our hands along with a thumb and forefinger, so when we woke up and rubbed our eyes, we'd have a rough wake up. Somehow in the process he gets a seed stuck in his eyelid. He was not a smart man. We all wake up to him screaming in pain, and in our drunken stupor we all rub our eyes, causing even more screaming. I still feel bad for the neighbors. I live in England, and here's it's widely expected that you buy drinks at the pub and rounds. Anyway, there was this one social circle at my local pub that regularly went there, and one guy became pretty infamous for always, and I mean always, dodging his round. Going to the men's room, leaving early, forgetting his wallet were all common ways he'd avoid it. This guy was middle-aged and fairly wealthy, so there was really no excuse for it. Anyway, this pub doesn't have a TV, but usually reads out the national lottery numbers on a Saturday night. His friends knew this guy played, and arranged a prank where his wife briefly took his wallet to find out his numbers, and then arranged for the pub landlord to read them out as the winning ones. The point was to see whether even when he had just become a millionaire he'd still be too cheap to buy everyone a drink. They were all really excited about this, and every regular at the pub knew it was going to happen, so there was an unusually big crowd that night. Eventually, the time for the lottery numbers comes round, they get read out, and we all watch the growing look of realization in his face. He opens his wallet, gets out his ticket, and stares at it for like a minute, without any emotional reaction whatsoever. The guy then turns to his wife, completely stoically, and says, "I've been having an affair with your sister for the last 4 years. You can keep the car and the house." He hands her the keys, and strolls out the pub. Supposedly, she never heard from him again. She had to get divorced with him in absentia. The last my friends heard was that he moved to Australia. You know that prank people play on kids where they'd go, I can't find, insert kid's name. I guess I'll give up and go home. Even though they are right next to them while playing hide and seek. I was playing hide and seek with my dad when I visited him in his office, and he did that. I was giggling under the table and waited for him to find me, and kept waiting. I guess someone probably distracted my dad because he actually forgot about me and ended up going home without me. His co-worker had to send me home. My mom was so pissed off. Put a bowl of wet cold spaghetti propped up over my little brother's bedroom door so it would fall on him when he opened it. Hour or two later I heard the crash, ran down to the hall to find my big dumb dog happily covered in surprise spaghetti. When I was in high school, some of the seniors decided to do a senior prank. They found a recipe for homemade stink bombs in the internet, then made large concentrations of the liquid in plastic garbage cans in the school library. Well, either they screwed up the recipe, or it was bad to begin with, because it caused a chemical reaction. THSG burned through the cans and the floor. The FBI was called in, and they considered it a chemical weapon. No one did to me, but they were all found out and expelled. While in Park City, my relatives got quite drunk. No food plus hot tub plus beer. Most of us were staying at a hotel. Others were just there to party. When it was time to go to sleep, my family headed back to our room to find that it was robbed. Being the most drunk they have ever been, my family members go on a rampage. My mom starts yelling at nobody. My dad starts running down the hall towards the check-in desk in a fit of rage. My uncle starts picking fights with the locals across the hall. Reminded me of that kid who shoves a remote up his butt when his mom cancelled his WoW account. Cops were called. All hell broke loose. Turns out my uncles thought it would be funny if they hid all of our stuff in the bathroom. My family was too drunk to check at the time. The worst part of it all was the fact I was trying to impress a foreign exchange student. Not really the worst, but funny. I was about 5 years old. I thought it would be funny to sneak up on my dad and try to scare him, so I waited outside his bedroom door. 5-year-olds have no stealth, so he knew what I was doing. I'm poised and ready to spring, and my adrenaline is going up. I'm totally ready to scare him. Suddenly my dad jumps out and says boo. I shit my pants and started screaming. We both lost that game. During my church retreat, the guys of my grade decided to pull a prank on the girls of the same grade. We filled about 4 to 5 water bottles with pee throughout the trip and threw them in the girls' cabin. The bottles were closed on the last night. It was funny until the girls' counselor got pissed and demanded to know who did it. To escape the situation, one of my friends pretended to not know what was going on and drank a sip out of the pee bottles. Not really a prank, but it was pretty hilarious to watch unfold. I'm a bartender, and one of my managers celebrated their birthday a few weeks ago. He'd already celebrated hard the night, so he asked that when he was poured shots, that we use a whiskey bottle filled with iced tea for him. We happily agreed, thinking it would be funny watching the other manager get wasted and having trouble keeping up. An hour or so later, the other manager came and told us that he also was having a rough night and wanted us to use iced tea when we were pouring shots of whiskey for him. So, both managers wander up to the bar and get shots with each other all night. All the bartenders know what's going on, but they have no clue that they are matching shot for shot of iced tea. Both start becoming amazed that the other can handle 20 plus shots of whiskey in only a few hours time. Both are acting as though they are wasted. We ultimately tell them what was going on by pouring them a drink from the other person's bottle. One April Fool's Eve, I took all my dad's underwear out of his drawer and put it in the freezer. The next morning I found him wrapped in a towel and all the underwear on his bed, defrosting. He thought it was a good joke, so good, in fact, that he started doing it to anything I left out long enough. This wasn't always a bad thing, though, as I woke up to cool shoes on warm days more than once.